This is your brain on risk. This is Mind Over Money, the podcast where Kevin Cook exposes the psychology of investing.
Welcome back to Mind Over Money. I'm Kevin Cook, your field guide and storyteller for the fascinating arena of behavioral economics. Today we're going to focus on the work of Dan Ariely, author of Predictably, Irrational. When he published the book in 2008, Ariely was a professor of behavioral economics at MIT. Now he's professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University, and he is the founder of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. Ariely's TED Talks have been watched over 7.8 million times. We've talked before about the cognitive bias called anchoring. Ariely has picked up where the forefathers of behavioral economics like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler left off by doing new experiments to find out how prevalent this bias really is. I'm going to read from Chapter 2 of Predictably Irrational, titled The Fallacy of Supply and Demand, Why the Price of Pearls and Everything Else is Up in the Air. At the onset of World War II, an Italian diamond dealer, James Assail, fled Europe for Cuba. There he found a new livelihood. The American Army needed waterproof watches, and Assail, through his contacts in Switzerland, was able to fill the demand. When the war ended, Assail's deal with the U.S. government dried up, and he was left with thousands of Swiss watches. The Japanese needed watches, of course, but they didn't have any money. They did have pearls, though, many thousands of them. Before long, Assail had taught his son how to barter Swiss watches for Japanese pearls. The business blossomed, and shortly thereafter, the son, Salvador Assail, became known as the Pearl King. The Pearl King had moored his yacht at Saint-Tropez one day in 1973 when a dashing young Frenchman, Jean-Claude Brouillet, came aboard from an adjacent yacht. Brouillet had just sold his air freight business and with the proceeds had purchased an atoll in French Polynesia, a blue lagoon paradise for himself and his young Tahitian wife. Brouillet explained that its turquoise waters abounded with black-lipped oysters, Pinctada margaritifera, and from the black lips of those oysters came something of note, black pearls. At the time, there was no market for Tahitian black pearls, and little demand. But Brouillet persuaded Assail to go into business with him. Together, they would harvest black pearls and sell them to the world. At first, Assail's marketing efforts failed. The pearls were gunmetal gray, about the size of musket balls, and he returned to Polynesia without having made a single sale. Assail could have dropped the black pearls altogether or sold them at a low price to a discount store. He could have tried to push them to customers by bundling them together with a few white pearls. But instead, Assail waited a year until the operation had produced some better specimens and then brought them to an old friend, Henry Winston, the legendary gemstone dealer. Winston agreed to put them in the window of his store on Fifth Avenue, with an outrageously high price tag attached. Assail, meanwhile, commissioned a full-page advertisement that ran in the glossiest of magazines. There, a string of Tahitian black pearls glowed, set among a spray of diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. The pearls, which had shortly before been the private business of a cluster of black-lipped oysters, hanging on a rope in the Polynesian Sea, were soon parading through Manhattan on the arched necks of the city's most prosperous divas. Assail had taken something of dubious worth and made it fabulously fine. Or, as Mark Twain once noted about Tom Sawyer, Tom had discovered a great law of human action, namely that in order to make a man covet a thing, it is only necessary to make the thing difficult to attain. How did the Pearl King do it? How did he persuade the cream of society to become passionate about Tahitian black pearls and pay him royally for them? In order to answer this question, I need to explain something about baby geese. A few decades ago, the naturalist Konrad Lorenz discovered that goslings, upon breaking out of their eggs, become attached to the first moving object they encounter, which is generally their mother. Lorenz knew this because in one experiment, he became the first thing they saw, and they followed him loyally from then on through adolescence. With that, Lorenz demonstrated not only that goslings make initial decisions based on what's available in their environment, but that they stick with a decision once it has been made. Lorenz called this natural phenomenon imprinting. Is the human brain, then, wired like that of a gosling? Do our first impressions and decisions become imprinted? And if so, how does this imprinting play out in our lives? When we encounter a new product, for instance, do we accept the first price that comes before our eyes? And more importantly, does that price, which in academic lingo we call an anchor, have a long-term effect on our willingness to pay for the product from then on? It seems that what's good for the goose is good for humans as well, and this includes anchoring. From the beginning, for instance, a sale anchored his pearls to the finest gems in the world, and the prices followed forever after. Similarly, once we buy a new product at a particular price, we become anchored to that price. But how exactly does this work? Why do we accept anchors? Next, we'll dive into the experiment that Ariely and his colleagues conducted to answer these questions. And after that, I have a productivity secret from Dan's latest book that could literally change your life. It's a real golden nugget that will help you control, if not crush, procrastination. Or should I call it a black pearl? I'll be back faster than you can spell Pinctada Margarita Fera. Okay, we're back to reading from Dan Ariely's 2008 book, Predictably Irrational, and we're in Chapter 2. Consider this. If I asked you for the last 2 digits of your Social Security number, mine are 79, then asked you whether you would pay this number in dollars, for me this would be $79, for a particular bottle of Côte du Rhône, 1998, would the mere suggestion of that number influence how much you would be willing to spend on the wine? Sounds preposterous, doesn't it? Well, wait until you see what happened to a group of MBA students at MIT a few years ago. Now here we have a nice Côte du Rhône Jaboulet Parallel, said Drazen Pralic, a professor at MIT's Sloan School of Management, as he lifted a bottle admiringly. It's a 1998. At the time, sitting before him were the 55 students from his marketing research class. On this day, Drazen, George Lowenstein, a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and I would have an unusual request for this group of future marketing pros. We would ask them to jot down the last 2 digits of their Social Security numbers and tell us whether they would pay this amount for a number of products, including the bottle of wine. Then we would ask them to actually bid on these items in an auction. What were we trying to prove? The existence of what we call arbitrary coherence. The basic idea of arbitrary coherence is this. Although initial prices, such as the price of a sale's pearls, are arbitrary, once those prices are established in our minds, they will shape not only present prices, but also future prices. This makes them coherent. So would thinking about one's Social Security number be enough to create an anchor? And would that initial anchor have a long-term influence? That's what we wanted to see. For those of you who don't know much about wines, Drazen continued, this bottle received 86 points from Wine Spectator. It has the flavor of red berry, mocha, and black chocolate. It's a medium-bodied, medium-intensity, nicely balanced red, and it makes for delightful drinking. Drazen held up another bottle. This was a Hermitage Jaboulet La Chapelle, 1996, with a 92-point rating from the Wine Advocate magazine. The finest La Chapelle since 1990, Drazen intoned, while the students looked up curiously. Only 8,100 cases made. In turn, Drazen held up 4 other items. A cordless trackball by Logitech, a cordless keyboard and mouse, also by Logitech, a design book, The Perfect Package, How to Add Value Through Graphic Design, and a 1-pound box of Belgian chocolates by Newhouse. Drazen passed out forms that listed all the items. Now, I want you to write the last 2 digits of your Social Security number at the top of the page, he instructed, and then write them again next to each of the items in the form of a price. In other words, if the last 2 digits are 23, write $23. Now, when you're finished with that, he added, I want you to indicate on your sheets with a simple yes or no whether you would pay that amount for each of the products. When the students had finished answering yes or no to each item, Drazen asked them to write down the maximum amount they were willing to pay for each of the products. their bids. Once they had written down their bids, the students passed the sheets up to me, and I entered their responses into my laptop and announced the winners. One by one, the student who had made the highest bid for each of the products would step up to the front of the class, pay for the product, and take it with him or her. The students enjoyed this class exercise, but when I asked them if they felt that writing down the last 2 digits of their Social Security numbers had influenced their final bids, they quickly dismissed my suggestion. No way. When I got back to my office, I analyzed the data. Did the digits from the Social Security numbers serve as anchors? Remarkably, they did. The students with the highest ending Social Security digits, from 80 to 99, bid highest, while those with the lowest ending numbers, 1 to 20, bid lowest. The top 20%, for instance, bid an average of $56 for the cordless keyboard. The bottom 20% bid an average of $16. In the end, we could see that students with Social Security numbers ending in the upper 20% placed bids that were 216 to 346% higher than those of the students with Social Security numbers ending in the lowest 20%. And as an aside here, Ariely has a table with all this data in his book on page 29. I'm reading the hard copy version. Okay, back to his story. Now, if the last 2 digits of your Social Security number are a high number, I know what you must be thinking. I've been paying too much for everything my entire life. This is not the case, however. Social Security numbers were the anchor in this experiment only because we requested them. We could have just as well asked for the current temperature outside or the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Any question, in fact, would have created the anchor. Does that seem rational? Of course not, but that's the way we are. Goslings, after all. The data had one more interesting aspect. Although the willingness to pay for these items was arbitrary, there was also a logical, coherent aspect to it. When we looked at the bids for the 2 pairs of related items, the 2 wines and the 2 computer components, their relative prices seemed incredibly logical. Everyone was willing to pay more for the keyboard than for the trackball, and also pay more for the 1996 Hermitage than for the 1998 Coderon. The significance of this is that once the participants are willing to pay a certain price for one product, their willingness to pay for other items in the same product category was judged relative to that first price, the anchor. This, then, is what we call arbitrary coherence. Initial prices are largely arbitrary and can be influenced by responses to random questions. But once those prices are established in our minds, they shape not only what we are willing to pay for an item, but also how much we are willing to pay for related products. This makes them coherent. Now, I need to add one more important clarification to the story that I've just told. In life, we are bombarded by prices. We see the manufacturer's suggested retail price for cars, lawnmowers, and coffee makers. We get the real estate agent's spiel on local housing prices. But price tags by themselves are not necessarily anchors. They become anchors when we contemplate buying a product or service at that particular price. That's when the imprint is set. From then on, we are willing to accept a range of prices, but as with the pull of a bungee cord, we always refer back to the original anchor. Thus, the first anchor influences not only the immediate buying decision, but many others that follow. All right, and that's enough of Chapter 2 from Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational. Make sure you take time to read that book. It's excellent. If you liked Freakonomics for the way it gave you new perspective on knowledge about society and human behavior via statistics, you'll love Predictably Irrational for its ability to go inside our decision-making. Okay, it's time for that golden nugget, or should I say black pearl, that I promised you earlier. Ariely has a new book I want to tell you a little bit about. It's titled Payoff. Let me read from this short article by Marguerite Ward, writing for CNBC.com on February 22nd. Marguerite is a reporter for CNBC Make It, and I get a daily email from them about different stuff they're doing, profiling entrepreneurs, because that's what they cover, is entrepreneurs and money and careers. All right, here's Marguerite's short story on Dan Ariely's new book. It hasn't even been 2 months since New Year's, but you've probably already forgotten your 2017 resolutions. According to a psychologist who studies motivation, you don't fail to act on your goals simply because you're not determined enough. Everything we do with time and money is a trade-off, says Dan Ariely, professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University. The problem is we don't always see what we're giving up, he tells CNBC. To make smarter time decisions, Ariely suggests adopting an old-fashioned organization method, keeping a calendar. Maintaining a daily calendar makes you more aware of the small trade-offs you make every day, according to the psychologist. For example, is the free time you have after dinner best spent perusing social media or working on a personal project? It's all about opportunity cost, what you're giving up, says Ariely, whose book Payoff explores how to become more motivated. Calendars help us see the opportunity cost of our decisions. Here's Ariely's formula for staying on top of your goals. Break down your big goals into small daily tasks. For example, if you wanted to write a book by the end of 2017, figure out how many pages you'd have to write each day to get there. Next, schedule time to do those daily tasks. For example, you could block 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. every night for writing. Next, enter your daily tasks into your calendar each day. The act of writing them down will remind you of your goal, the psychologist says. Writing your goal down on a calendar each day makes it easier for us to see what we give up, Ariely says, and what progress we make. Okay, that's the end of Marguerite's short synopsis. So I'll have to admit that if I had read this a year ago, I would not have recognized much value or even understood what Ariely was talking about. It sounds so abstract or mechanical to me. But in the past year, I learned from two types of professional achievers exactly what he's talking about that does indeed work fantastically. The first group were writers. Lots of people say they want to write a book, and many even start, myself included. But the writers who get the most writing done that turns into many books are the ones who schedule it on their calendars like an immovable priority, whether that's at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. The second group is salespeople. They have a unique challenge, especially in the age of social media with its countless distractions and illusions of prospecting. Salespeople must do something they call time blocking to secure and guard chunks of time on their calendars every day for really important work like prospecting, which feeds their sales pipeline. If they don't, they soon run out of new leads to contact. The to-do list may still have its place for Saturday afternoon errands and chores, but for the really important but not urgent projects and goals in your life, remember this handy rule. What gets scheduled gets done. So start using your calendar, not just for meetings, appointments, reminders, and deadlines. We all do that for our jobs, our kids, our dentist, and our cars. Now it's time to do it for your own personal projects and objectives. I found recently, after I had signed up for 3 online courses that I could watch on demand, that I wasn't following through with them. I was procrastinating because I had all the time in the world. And I read that it's also a big problem with colleges that offer open-ended survey courses with self-determined goals. The writers, the salespeople, and the professor all have the solution. Schedule it. Thanks once again for joining me on Mind Over Money. I hope you can make use of this productivity pearl. And be sure to follow me on Twitter @KevinBCook, where I focus on posting content and resources revolving around technology, startups, marketing, and of course, anything to do with your brain. I'll talk to you soon.